I see some people trickling in here to the already full audience. I would just like to welcome you guys all to the 5th NNP Symposium. We've had the honor and privilege to do 5 of these so far. This is the 5th. So we're really excited to bring you all these really cool presentations on different numismatic topics. This is the 3rd hour for this symposium. So there have been 3 prior presentations and 2 going on currently. So thank you guys for tuning in. The symposium, the NNP Symposium, goes through Saturday, so we hope that you are able to enjoy a lot more presentations over the course of the next few days. I will go over a few housekeeping type things before I introduce our speaker for the hour. The first one being that there is a Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen for all the attendees. If you have any questions throughout the presentation or after it, just whenever you have questions, pop them in there, and we will do a Q&A session at the end after Mr. Souza's given his presentation. And then the second one being recordings. So we are recording this, and all of the recordings for this symposium will be available roughly 2 weeks after the close. And so you can look for those if you missed one that you wanted to see or really enjoyed one and want to watch it again. That will be available to you guys. So just a heads up on that. And I will introduce our speaker for the hour. Our speaker is Michael Souza. He is the current president of the North Shore Numismatic Society, and that he has been involved in that for over 35 years. And he's based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So while it's 1 o'clock Eastern time, it is much earlier than that where he is from. So I definitely thank him for waking up early and giving this presentation to us. I'm sure it will be super, super interesting. And so, Mr. Souza, if you want to unmute yourself and turn on your video. Awesome, and I will let you go for it.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the NNP for putting the symposium on. I've attended, this is my 3rd year that I've attended symposium, and I decided why not be a speaker also. And thank you for accepting me as one of the speakers this year. I think it's a real privilege. So without further ado, I'm going to start my presentation. I've got a lot of notes here. I can't remember all the facts, so I've written everything down, and I'll read it as I proceed with the slides. And so sit back and enjoy the occupation of Hong Kong and the life of a veteran. Okay. To give you a little bit of background, in 1841, after losing the First Opium War, China ceded Hong Kong Island to Great Britain. The city of Victoria on the island became its capital. In 1860, Hong Kong ceded Kowloon on the mainland to Great Britain also. In 1853, when the resident British troops were reassigned to fight in the Crimean War, Lieutenant Colonel William Kane advocated the creation of a civilian defense force, and the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps, known as the Volunteers, was established in 1854. In 1898, Hong Kong acquired property known as the New Territories on the mainland, along with outlying islands under a 99-year lease with China to expire on July 1st, 1997. My father, Henry Souza, was born in Hong Kong in July 1921. In 1938, at the age of 17, he joined the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps. Here's a picture of him in 1939 when he was a member of the 3rd Battery, consisting of naval 6-inch guns. During that time, there were 3 banks issuing circulating currency in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. Here's an example of its 1935 $1 banknote. And here it's a $5 note of 1941. The second bank was the Chartered Bank of India, Australia, and China. And here we have an example of its 1941 $5 banknote. And here's a copy of the $10 banknote, also dated 1941. And the 3rd bank issuing currency in Hong Kong at that time was the Mercantile Bank of India. And here's an example of the $5 note, also issued in 41. The government of Hong Kong also issued its own notes, and here's an example of the $1 note issued in 1940 and 1941. At that time, there were only 3 coins in circulation: the 1 cent, 5 cent, and 10 cent coins. All coins were minted in England and shipped to Hong Kong. When war began in Europe in 1939, Japan had already been at war with China since 1937. To protest the invasion of China and to curb its military expansion, an oil embargo was imposed against Japan. Hong Kong newspaper accounts from 1939 hinted that war with Japan was inevitable. Sometime between 1939 and 1941, my father was reassigned to the field ambulance unit of the volunteers. On February 26, 1941, Hong Kong issued 6 stamps to commemorate the 100th anniversary of British sovereignty over Hong Kong. Almost a year later, the Japanese army would celebrate its occupation of Hong Kong. That same year, Hong Kong began to experience the shortage of 1 cent, 5 cent, and 10 cent coins. And the government claimed that these coins were being smuggled to Shanghai and sold to Japanese agents for their metal to assist the Japanese in their war efforts. In May 1941, the Hong Kong government had to issue 1 cent paper notes, and later in October, they also issued 5 cent and 10 cent notes to cover the shortage. War began on December 8, 1941, when 52,000 soldiers of the Japanese 23rd Army swarmed across the borders from China into Hong Kong. To oppose them were 14,000 Allied soldiers consisting of Canadian, British, and volunteer units. In 40 hours, they overcame the defenses held by British forces along the Shin Mun Redoubt and the Gin Drinkers line, defined by the zigzag red lines on this map. Excuse me. Hope you can see my cursor. The zigzag lines were the British defenses. The city of Kowloon on the mainland fell to the Japanese on December 12th, and the remaining defenders retreated to Hong Kong Island. If any of you had ever visited Hong Kong, you will recognize the clock tower from the Star Ferry, which is still there. When the British were under siege on Hong Kong Island, there emerged the shortage of coins and $1 banknotes. The shortage of the $1 banknotes arose when the Japanese distributed leaflets, warning that all notes over $10 would be worthless after the Japanese took over the colony. To relieve the situation, a stock of the Bank of China's 5 yuan notes were discovered on the premises of the Commercial Press Limited in Kings Road, North Point. These notes were overprinted Hong Kong government $1 and released for circulation on the 13th of December. The Japanese successfully invaded Hong Kong Island on December 18th and split the Allied forces consisting of British units, Hong Kong Volunteer Force units, and Canadian troops. It was during one of the battles on December 19th that Sergeant Major John Osborne of the Winnipeg Grenadiers was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross when he threw himself on top of a Japanese grenade to save the lives of his men. This was the only Victoria Cross awarded during the battle. By December 24th, the Japanese had captured most of Hong Kong Island. On Christmas Day 1941, the Allied troops were ordered by the Governor Mark Young to surrender. The order reads, to Brigadier Wallace, GOC, which stands for General Officer Commanding, authorizes me to state that the white flag will be hoisted and all military operations will cease forthwith. You will consider yourselves prisoners of war. Issue orders to all commands to cease fighting. From Steward for GOC British forces in China. At that time, my father was stationed in Fort Stanley, situated in the southern part of the island. This Japanese propaganda postcard depicts the surrender talks between Governor Mark Young and Japanese Lieutenant General Takashi Sakai on Christmas Day. My father and all the other Allied troops became POWs and were sent to Samshoipo POW camp on the mainland. The Japanese prepared an index card on each POW, and at the end of the war, these records were seized and kept at the National Archives in the UK. In 2016, when I visited London, I went to the National Archives and found my father's POW card. The English translations of the Japanese entries are in red. The reverse provides details of his incarceration. The middle of the card states that on July 25th, 1943, he was hospitalized for chronic bronchitis and was discharged from hospital on August 13th, 1943. The top of the card indicates that on May 14th, 1944, he was transferred to the Tokyo Camp Administration from Hong Kong, and later on April 14th, 1945, to the Sendai Camp Administration. The bottom of the card states that on September 9th, 1945, he was transferred to a Captain Candlewood at Port Yamato. I will have more on this part of his life later. This photo shows Lieutenant General Sakai entering Hong Kong in his victory parade. He became the second military governor of Hong Kong until February 1942 and retired from active service in 1943. Kaneo Inouye was a second-generation Japanese Canadian born in Kamloops, British Columbia. Kamloops is about a 4 to 5 hour drive from where I live. He was studying in Japan when the war began, and in May 1942, he was recruited as an interpreter and sent to Samshoipo POW camp in Hong Kong. Inouye was also a member of the Kempe Tai, the Japanese equivalent of the German Gestapo, and was particularly cruel towards the Canadian prisoners. The prisoners nicknamed him the Kamloops Kid and Slap Happy due to his penchant for slapping prisoners for no reason. I'll have more on him later. The coinage for Hong Kong was also affected by the war. All Hong Kong coins were minted in England, and according to the records at the British Royal Mint, there were 5 shipments of the 1941 1-cent coins. After the war started, 1 shipment was unloaded in South Africa, returned to the mint, and melted down. The fate of the remaining 4 shipments is unknown, and there are rumors that 1 shipment was sunk by a German or Japanese submarine, and another shipment was captured by the Japanese in Hong Kong and melted down for the war. None of the 5-cent coins destined for Hong Kong were shipped, and most were melted down for the nickel to be used in the war effort. Surviving specimens are some of the rarest of Hong Kong coins. I have in my collection 3 of the 1941 5-cent coins. The 1941 H, which was minted at the Heaton Mint, and the 1941 KN, which was minted at the Kings Norton Mint. These stamps were printed in 1941 by Bradbury Wilkinson, but due to the start of the war, they could not be delivered to Hong Kong until after the liberation. The official issue date of this series was changed to August 28, 1946. After the victory, the Japanese used the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank building as the headquarters for the administration of Hong Kong. The Japanese soldiers shot 1 bank official to intimidate the others to open the vaults. In the vault, there were unissued banknotes totaling $119,800,000. Although half of these notes were already signed, they had no value because the bank had not yet acquired the reserves that were required by law before they could be issued. In any event, the Japanese forced the bank officials to issue them. These notes became known as duress notes. The notes consisted of the 1934 issue of the $50 note shown here, the 1934, 1936, and 1937 issues of the $100 note, and the 1936 and 1937 issues of the $500 note. When the war ended, all these duress notes were honored by the bank, even though there was no obligation for them to do so. The Japanese issued an order limiting the use of Hong Kong currency to $10 and introduced the Japanese military yen to the population. The Japanese reopened the Hong Kong branch of the Yokohama Specie Bank and made it the official issuer of the Japanese yen. Citizens were required to exchange Hong Kong currency at a rate of $2 for 1 military yen. For a short while, Hong Kong currency was allowed to circulate with the military yen. The initial 3 military yen were overprinted notes printed in August 1938 for use in southern China. The red overprints crossed out the name Bank of Japan, and the 4 characters identified them as Japanese Imperial Government military notes. The 3 notes in the series were 1 yen, shown here, the overprint 5 yen, and the overprint 10 yen. Later, the Japanese also circulated the series, which was printed in December 1938. These 3 notes omit the name Bank of Japan and incorporated the previously overprinted inscription into the design. Again, they were 1 yen, the 5 yen, and the 10 yen. The second series of notes included notes of a smaller size and small denominations that were printed in November 1940. These notes have 11 characters along the top of the note that translate as Imperial Japanese Government Military Note and had no serial numbers. They consisted of the 1 sen, the 5 sen, the 10 sen, the 50 sen, 1 yen, 5 yen, 10 yen. A third series of notes similar to the second series were also issued. The only difference between the third series and the second series is that these notes have 7 characters along the top rather than 11, and have serial numbers to the left of the on the left of the note. The removal of 4 of the characters deleted the reference to military notes. They were again issued in 1 sen, 5 sen, 10 sen, 50 sen, 1 yen, 5 yen, 10 yen, and they introduced a new 100 yen. This banknote with a denomination of 2.5 rin was printed but never issued for use. This example was offered at a recent John Bull auction for $12,000, but did not sell. This is the only banknote that I need to complete my whole collection, but unfortunately the price is too high. I can't afford this. On July 24th, 1942, the military yen was revalued at 4 Hong Kong dollars to 1 military yen, and the military yen was made the sole legal tender in Hong Kong. The Japanese severely punished anyone caught using Hong Kong dollars. The Japanese also introduced 20 of their definitive stamps for use in Hong Kong. These are just examples of the stamps used, but these were not cancelled in Hong Kong. The last three stamps on the bottom right were overprinted with new values and issued in 1945. Here's an example of Hong Kong occupation mail during the Japanese, using the Japanese stamps. On December 8, 1942, on the first anniversary of the war, the Japanese issued a set of two pictorial postcards. One depicted the Hong Kong race course, and the other depicted the sinking of the British training ship HMS Tamar that was moored in Hong Kong harbor when the war began. On the same day, the Japanese also issued 3 postcards to their soldiers to commemorate the first anniversary of the war. The 3 postcards came in a paper folder with a note explaining each of the postcards. The first postcard commemorated the attack on Pearl Harbor. On the reverse, all 3 postcards have the same printed stamp value of 2 sen and the image of a samurai warrior. The second postcard commemorated the attack and capture of an anti-aircraft battery in Hong Kong. And the third postcard commemorated the British surrender of Singapore. Between 1942 and 1944, the Japanese issued several postcards for the public's use. They are very plain with a printed value in the corner. This one with a 2 sen value below, this one is a 2 sen value below the image of a mounted warrior. This postcard is one with a 10 sen stamp depicting the Nagoya Castle. This postcard with the original 2 sen value was overprinted with a 1.5 yen overprint and is believed to have been issued later in the war. I have very little information about these 2 postcards. They are described in the catalog as military affairs postcards, and on one, the stamp value is replaced with a picture of a perched dove, and on the other, a 5-pointed star. In 1944, the Japanese issued 3 100 military yen notes for use. Here we have the 1944 100 military yen in the style of the overprinted series. And that was followed by the 100 military yen note printed in yellow-green in the style of the first series. And lastly, the first series 100 military yen printed in black. Of the 2, this is a tougher one to get. While all this was going on, my father languished in Sumsripo prison of war camp from 1941 until April of 1944. On April 29, 1944, he along with 47 Canadians and 137 Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps prisoners were embarked on a ship called the Nauru Maru, and were bound for Japan. En route, it stopped over in Formosa, then went through Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and arrived at Moji on May 27, 1944. This was the last prisoner transport to leave Hong Kong, and they were very lucky to arrive in Japan. Several Japanese transports with Allied prisoners en route to Japan were sunk by American submarines with a huge loss of POW lives. This is because the Japanese refused to print a red cross on the side of the ship to denote that they were either hospital ships or that they contained POWs. So American submarines, not knowing any better that they were full of POWs, sank them on sight. He was sent by train to Sendai Camp No. 2 to work at the Iwaki coal mine, located in a village called Yoshima. There they mined coal in 2 12-hour shifts. Every night, each prisoner was allowed to bring back a 1-pound lump of coal to heat their barracks. Food usually consisted of barley mixed with rice, and for working down in a mine, they each received a bun. The buns were either eaten or used as currency by the prisoners. 6 buns could be exchanged for a tin of corned beef or spam from the Red Cross parcels. Here's a photo of him in Japan on Christmas Day, 1944. In the photo, he is seated in a second row behind a goat. Note the Red Cross parcels. The Red Cross parcels did not arrive regularly, and often each parcel had to be shared among several prisoners. Very often, the Japanese guards pilfered the parcels for what they could use before giving the rest to the prisoners. Although the prisoners were also paid wages of 10 cents for each day they worked in the mine, there was nothing to buy in the camp, so it was used for gambling. The prisoners very often also used cigarettes from the Red Cross parcels as currency to acquire items from other prisoners. Now your question is, where did I get these pictures from? My dad had a collection of these. When my dad was alive, he showed me a collection of these pictures. Now, where he got them and who took the pictures, we don't know. But in 2008, in England, the widow of a photographer released the negatives of a bunch of photos, of which this was one, to the Daily Telegraph. And the question was, who are these prisoners? Apparently, the photographer, after the war, he was very afraid of any what do you call, what's the word I'm looking for? He was here to hide these pictures. He didn't want to be caught with these pictures, so he hid them until he died, and then his widow released them to the newspaper, and that was only in 2008. But who took these pictures, I really don't know. It's been lost to history. In the next picture, he is seated behind a white table, and is the person facing the other prisoners. He was in a church choir before the war, and he said he was leading the prisoners and singing Christmas carols. This is one entrance to the coal mine taken after the war on August 28, 1945. This picture was obtained from my brother-in-law, whose father was also a POW in the same camp. On August 15, 1945, Japan ceased hostilities, and I have two photos of my father taken on August 28, 1945. In the first photo, he is seated in a front row, third from the right, wearing the hat. In the second photo, he is seated in the middle row, second from the right. At that time, he told me he was 24 years old and he only weighed 80 pounds. At the war's end, the Japanese were asked to prepare a roster of prisoners in each camp. I found a copy of the Sendai Camp number 2 roster on the internet. This excerpt lists my father third from the bottom as prisoner number 179. Another website provided me with an aerial view of Sendai Camp number 2, taken on September 2nd by American planes as they dropped food parcels to the prisoners. Sadly, on that day, my dad told me that one American prisoner, Sergeant Joseph Sarata, died when one of the food pallets tore away from the parachute and hit him. The camp was liberated on September 7th and evacuated on September 9th. According to my father's POW index card, he was handed over to a Captain Canderwood at Port Yamato. Some of the ex-POWs were taken by train down to Yokohama, where they were processed for repatriation. This picture of aircraft carrier HMS Colossus's hangar shows the cots laying out to accommodate the former POWs. En route to Japan, the planes were pushed over the side to create space. This picture also came from my brother-in-law's files. The former POWs were taken to the Philippines for rest and recuperation for 2 weeks before being repatriated to Hong Kong. On September 1st, 1945, when the British military resumed the administration of Hong Kong, the currency issue had to be resolved. But until new Hong Kong banknotes arrived, there was no option but to allow the circulation of the Japanese military yen to continue. The plates for a never issued Japanese 1,000 yen note were found, and a decision was made by the British military administration to re-engrave the plates and strike through the 7 characters, adding a denomination of $1 and the phrase Hong Kong government. These were never issued and were eventually destroyed. Surviving examples are very expensive. Excuse me. In addition, stocks of the Central Reserve Bank of China 1,000 yuan and 5,000 yuan notes were discovered at the Chonghua Book Company in Kowloon. The 1,000 yuan notes were overprinted with Hong Kong government $5 and the 5,000 yuan notes with Hong Kong government $10. The overprinting and numbering was done by the old printery and were held in the vaults of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. However, before these notes could be released, government notes printed in the UK arrived. These overprinted notes were held until February 1946, and then they were burned. Records show 2.4 million $5 notes were overprinted. Again, surviving examples are very valuable. To alleviate the shortage of legitimate currency, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank located some $5 notes printed in 1940 and 1941. They were issued after adding a supplemental 4-digit serial number vertically on the face and back of the note to distinguish them from the $5 banknotes issued by the Japanese during the war. The location of the additional serial numbers are highlighted by the red arrows. The government of Hong Kong also issued some of the earliest notes in 1945. There were 3 small uniface notes of 1 cent, 5 cents, and 10 cents. On September 6, 1945, the Japanese Ministry of Finance announced that all military yen notes were void. Overnight, the military yen literally became worthless pieces of paper to the people of Hong Kong. On September 16, 1945, Japanese Major General Okada and Vice Admiral Fujita signed the instrument of surrender pictured on the right. On August 29, 1946, Hong Kong issued 2 stamps to commemorate the Allied victory. The stamps depicted a phoenix rising from the flames, symbolizing the rebuilding of Hong Kong after the war. So what happened to the Kamloops Kid after the war? After the war ended in August 1945, Inouye was identified in Kowloon by liberated Canadian soldiers and was arrested. The Kamloops Kid was then tried for war crimes by a military tribunal and for being involved in the deaths of several Canadian soldiers. He was convicted and sentenced to death. However, the verdict was overturned on appeal because as a Canadian citizen, he could not be prosecuted for war crimes committed by enemy troops. In April 1947, Inouye was tried on a criminal charge of treason. He was again found guilty, and on August 27, 1947, he was hanged at a Hong Kong prison. He was the only Canadian executed for treason in World War II. At the end of the war, the former military governor of Hong Kong was found guilty of war crimes in China and executed by firing squad on September 30th, 1946. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation's first post-war notes were issued on March 30th, 1946. They consisted of a $5 note and $10 note, and here we have an example of the $5 note. The Chartered Bank of India, Australia, and China began reissuing notes in 1948 and also consisted of a $5 and $10 note, and here's the 5. The Mercantile Bank of India also resumed issuing notes in 1948, but were only in $100 denominations. My dad and mom got married on April 9th, 1947. In 1949, He was a member of the renamed Hong Kong Defence Force and became a marksman. In 1951, the Hong Kong Defence Force was granted the title Royal Hong Kong Defence Force. And in 1961, the unit was renamed the Hong Kong Regiment, and in 1970 to the Royal Hong Kong Regiment. On September 8, 1951, 49 nations signed the Treaty of San Francisco. It officially served to end the Second World War with Japan and became effective on April 25, 1952. Under the terms of the treaty, Japan agreed to reimburse the occupied nations and under Article 16, agreed to donate £4,500,000 to the Red Cross for POWs that suffered undue hardships. Remember Article 16 because it becomes relevant later. Between 1950 and 1967, my dad entered numerous local shooting events and won over 200 awards. He became one of Hong Kong's premier sportsmen. In 1958, Japan hosted the Third Asian Games in Tokyo and issued this first day cover and 4 commemorative stamps to celebrate this event. My father returned to Tokyo, this time as an athlete, representing Hong Kong at the Third Asian Games. He's pictured here second from the right. At the Games, he won the bronze medal for Hong Kong in rifle shooting and is pictured on the podium. Here's a picture of the bronze medal and the third place diploma which accompanied the medal. In 1959, what is now the late Prince Philip visited Hong Kong, and on March 7th, he and my mother were both invited to meet Prince Philip on board his yacht Britannia. In 1960, he represented Hong Kong at the Olympic Games in Rome. Here he is pictured with his on-shoulder competition rifle. The Hong Kong Olympic contingent consisted only of 5 athletes, 4 shooters and 1 swimmer. Here's the Hong Kong contingent entering the Olympic Stadium. My father ranked 44th in his event. Italy did not issue any coins to commemorate the Olympics. Instead, they issued the following commemorative stamps and postcards, and my father had them mailed to himself at the Olympic Village. Here's postcard set number 1 and 2, postcard set number 3 and 4, and postcard set number 5. Prior to the start of the 1964 Olympic Games, my father was one of 7 athletes interviewed for an article called The Olympic Games, and it was published in the October 1964 issue of Sports Illustrated. He again represented Hong Kong at the Olympic Games in Tokyo and ranked 39th in his event. Japan issued 2 silver coins, a 100 yen and 1,000 yen, to commemorate the 1964 Olympics. In my collection, I only have a 100 yen. In addition, they also issued 4 souvenir stamps that my father put on this postcard and again had it mailed to himself at the Olympic Village. In 1966, he represented Hong Kong at the 5th Asian Games and came in 5th in his event. Thailand issued a 1 baht coin to commemorate the 5th Asian Games and also issued 8 stamps shown here to commemorate the Games. He was also a member of the Hong Kong Regiment Sniper Section, and he is shown here wearing a camouflage headgear, taking a break from his training. Here we have a picture of him with all his trophies. This is our family in 1967, he raised 6 children, and here I am, the run standing here, the second one with the big years. In 1968, our family emigrated to Vancouver, Canada. Because he was one of Hong Kong's noted sportsmen, his departure was reported in the newspapers. If we did not immigrate to Canada, he would have represented Hong Kong in the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City. So he gave up a lot to bring us here to Canada. In 1972, my parents celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. One of the proudest moments in our family was obtaining our Canadian citizenship in 1973. In September 74, my sister gave birth to her first son, and my parents became grandparents. This picture was taken on Christmas Day, 1974. 5 months later, at age 53, in May 1975, he died of a heart attack at home. But that's not quite the end of the story. On Christmas Day, 1941, the UK issued this cover to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the capitulation of Hong Kong. The issue was limited to 750 covers. In August 1995, the government issued this first day cover with full commemorative stamps to recognize the Royal Hong Kong Regiment's 141 years of service. On September 2nd, the government disbanded the Royal Hong Kong Regiment in anticipation of the handover of Hong Kong back to China on July 1st, 1997. In September 1995, the Philatelic Bureau of Hong Kong issued this cover to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the signing of the surrender document and the liberation of Hong Kong. Only 88 of these special covers were issued, and mine is numbered 75. Many civilians had kept wartime military yen and had been petitioning successive Japanese governments to redeem their military yen. Many of them had become destitute after being forced to trade Hong Kong dollars for their military yen. Even as late as 1999, court cases have been launched against the Japanese government. All have failed. Why? The Japanese government cite the 1951 Treaty of San Francisco that required Japan to reimburse nations that it occupied. And because these payments were made on a national level, there was no provision to reimburse the claimants on an individual level. As a result, many civilians that lived through the occupation went to their graves still possessing bundles of worthless Japanese military yen. Many Far East Veterans Associations have also lobbied successive Japanese governments to reimburse them for their time spent as POWs and as slave laborers. This time, the Japanese government cited Article 16 of the 1951 Treaty of San Francisco to deny payments. If you recall, Article 16 of the treaty required Japan to pay £4,500,000 to the Red Cross for POWs that suffered undue hardship. And that clause absolved Japan of all future compensation to the POWs. In 2001, the British government decided to pay its surviving Far East POWs or their widows a one-time £10,000 payment to recognize their wartime suffering. But by that time, many veterans or their widows were no longer around to collect. Getting to the end of the presentation here. In 2007, a researcher in Japan found documents in a national library that Japan had been selling opium in China during the war to back the value of the military scrip that was issued. Ironically, this is how Britain also acquired Hong Kong, by selling opium to the Chinese back in the 1860s. And finally, in 2016, the Royal Canadian Mint issued a $20 coin to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Winnipeg Grenadiers, and the Royal Rifles of Canada's participation in defending Hong Kong in 1941. The obverse bears the wartime effigy of King George VI. Christmas 2021 was the 80th anniversary of the surrender of Hong Kong. If my dad was alive, he would be 100 then. And that ends my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the screen.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you very much. That was a really good presentation. I enjoyed learning a lot about that, and there's so much history there, so rich in history. So that was really fun. So thank you.
Thank you. It took me about 18 years to put this together, 15 years to put it together.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's a good chunk of time.
Yes.
So we will open it up to Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. It looks like we have a few already. So put them in and I will start with the ones that we do have. Someone asks, how difficult is it to complete a set of these notes without the really expensive one, of course?
Actually, back in the 90s, it was very easy. If you go into a local coin store, you could find them in a junk box for $1 each, brand new, in uncirculated condition. But as time went on, the last 5 or 10 years, they've really got up in value. They've really gotten expensive. What I paid for $1 for these notes, they're about $20 each, some of them.
Oh.
But you can still find them. You still get them on eBay. Just watch out for fakes. A lot of them that are printed specimen have been overprinted, fraudulently. So just be careful.
Okay, yeah, that's a good tip. Another question, how long have you studied this topic?
Well, when my dad died, I was 19, and I really regret not sitting down with him and talking to him about his wartime experience. But like most veterans, he wouldn't talk about it very much. You find that from a lot of veterans, World War II vets, that they don't talk about much. They don't talk about their experience, whether they were in a POW camp or not. And at that time, when I was 19, I was just starting out in my career to study to become an accountant. I was working, and there just wasn't time. And nobody expected Dad to suddenly die of a heart attack. So it was really unexpected. So I would give anything to sit down with him for even half an hour to cover off some of the answers that I have while I was doing my research. Because I tried getting hold of his war records, and apparently they cannot be found. They're not in Hong Kong, they're not in England, and they've been lost. Apparently all the volunteer war records, some of them were destroyed by the Japanese during the war, and his post-World War II career, nobody can find them. So there are gaps in my story, but that's the best I can do. So it was a bit about, I started this about 2007. It was just a brainstorm to take my hobbies of coin collecting and stamp collecting and putting his story into it. And that's what most people like, is the fact that there was a personal element to this story.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that it was hard to find all this stuff, and you wish you could just talk to him to clear up some misconceptions. I'm surprised you have so many pictures, like all the pictures and everything you have. I was shocked, and that must have been pretty hard to find. How did you do that?
Well, he had those pictures. He had those pictures and he showed them to me. And that's how I got some of the information about how heavy it was, how they were allowed to bring a 1 pound lump of coal back from the mine to heat the barracks. All that information came from him. But he never opened up a lot. He was very reticent about what he wanted to tell us, because there were things that he saw that he will never tell us. Same with my mom. She lived through the occupation. She lived in China and then moved out to Hong Kong when the Japanese invaded. She moved out into Hong Kong 8 days before the Japanese invaded. And so she saw a lot in China that to this day, she would never disclose to us. And she only died last December at age 95, taking all that knowledge to the grave with her. But she told my sister one night when she had a nervous breakdown, and I've got to find out from my sister what she told her. So there's a lot that we don't know.
Yeah. There's another question. It says, are you just missing the two pieces? You mentioned the one specimen note and then the 1,000 yen, I believe, coin. Are those the only two you're missing?
Well, I've stopped collecting now because at my age, my kids are not interested, and I've started slowly to sell off my stamp and coin collection. So I'm not even looking for them anymore. You know, for the longest time, I debated whether I should buy that the 1941 overprint during the siege of Hong Kong, that little note. And at the time, they were selling for about 1,200 US. But then I always thought of buying one, but there are also a lot of counterfeits out there, and I don't want to spend that kind of money and find out I end up with a counterfeit. So, but again, over time, I got a picture of one, and I'm happy with that. I can't afford it now. I can't afford it, but I'm not buying anymore.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, there are no more questions in the queue. Guys, if you have any more questions, feel free to put them in there. We can come back to that in a little bit. I'll just do some closing type stuff, and then we'll see if we have any more questions. But yeah, I mentioned earlier that the NNP Symposium is going until Saturday. So feel free to tune in the rest of the day today, tomorrow, and all of Saturday for some more presentations like this about a lot of different numismatic topics. So there'll be some really interesting presentations coming up that you won't want to miss. So we encourage you to do that. So we would love to see some of the same names in the attendees list for upcoming ones. And I believe that is it. Recordings will be available roughly 2 weeks after this NNP Symposium closes. So if you wanted to watch one again, see one that you missed, anything like that, they will all be available on our website about 2 weeks after this closes. So
I'd like to thank the NNP for allowing me to become a speaker, and thank you all for attending. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and with that, we will end this presentation. So hope to see you guys at another presentation, and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.